Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Protecting Your Financial Institution from Mobile Fraud, a briefing from Soprano Design. We're excited you could join us. My name is Megan Billingsley, and I'll be moderating today's event. But before getting started, we have a few simple housekeeping matters for our viewers. At the bottom of your screen, you'll find some application widgets for your use. These widgets are all resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to optimize your desktop space. The slides will advance automatically throughout the presentation. To enlarge the slides, click the Enlarge Slides button in the top right-hand corner of your presentation window. Today, we're joined by Jane White, the Product Marketing Manager for Soprano's suite of security products. She has a background in marketing for drone security, startup marketing, and digital marketing. Now, as a security expert in the CPaaS market, she's focused on staying ahead of new fraud schemes and promoting measures to close vulnerabilities in all parts of the mobile communication chain. Today's webinar will focus on those security vulnerabilities within the finance and banking sector. So Jane, take it away.
Thank you so much, Megan, and that's exactly right. This is a topic that is so critical to keep top of mind right now in this industry. And Soprano Design has been serving enterprise customers in the government, financial, and healthcare industries for almost 30 years now. And what we have learned is you really can't set that bar high enough when it comes to security. And because we have our HQ in Australia and have done a lot of business in those enterprise spaces in Europe, we've always had that really high bar. And so building for security and learning from the lessons that we've got from the last 30 years and just bringing that security to all of our partners and customers is so top of mind. And so right now we are in the middle of a security and fraud campaign. We are also doing so much work in thought leadership and working with panels and other industry groups to help keep ahead of the security threats of tomorrow. And that's something that I will definitely talk about further in the slides here. But being able to future-proof and really project out what types of security, what types of protections that we will need in the future is one of the #1 things that should be part of any security strategy, especially in the banking industry. So just a little preface there, we also have the modern threats to finance. We will talk about them. Obviously, we don't have a crystal ball, but there are different trends in cybercrime and those types of fraud schemes that are specifically attacking the banking industry, where we can sort of see what kind of prevention measures might be the best thing to put forward into the future. And then, of course, we'll talk about the anatomy of the communication chain. This is, again, part of the thought leadership we have been doing around how to really protect against fraud that is attacking multiple vulnerability points. And this is something that is part of those new trends that I was talking about, where the level of sophistication and the number of vulnerability points that are involved in any specific scheme is going up. And so one of the things that's really critical to understand and think about when you're protecting your communication chain is, how do I look at the thing holistically? How do I assess where the vulnerability, the really root of it, is coming from? Because a lot of times it's obfuscated in the layers of those vulnerability points. So we'll get into that. And we'll also talk about the 14 fraud types that are a threat to the banking industry right now. And we'll pull out a couple that are really becoming that new flavor of the month for fraud, specifically in banking, because that too is going to help us focus our resources and prevent against the most likely and the highest, basically $sign risk type of fraud. So before we really go too deep on the fraud and security components that will kind of the nuts and bolts, the weeds of it, it's important to really just mention, what is mobile offering the banking industry that really can't be offered by other channels? Because we do open ourselves up to inevitable vulnerability whenever we use a new communication channel. And mobile is no different from that, just the same as, fraudsters can take advantage of email and voice and even banking apps. SMS is vulnerability in the ways that we'll discuss, but it's also one of the most effective channels. We know that SMS has a 99% read rate. We also know that response times and deliverability times with SMS is way faster than any other channel. So when you want to get a critical message to an account holder in a really short amount of time and make sure they see it. If it's something like a fraud alert, one-time passwords, they really should be sent through mobile messaging. But on top of that, we are seeing a lot of trends towards SMS and other mobile channels being a preference, even for account holders or consumers that are interacting with enterprise businesses. So 64% of consumers want to use text over voice as a customer service channel. And 81% of those consumers are saying, I don't want to be tied to my phone and my computer when I'm interacting with customer service. So that's something that a mobile channel will solve for. And it's also something that more and more customers, especially in that 18 to 34 age group, are going to be looking for when they are choosing a bank to have an account at. And when you're competing on the margins of customer experience, like so many of us are now, especially in the banking industry, that kind of choice and preference being offered, especially to younger account holders, will make the difference for some of them. And so being able to offer that, it's just a positive perception that they'll walk away with. And all of this is kind of angling towards what's best for the account holder, what's best for the business, and where those two things kind of meet in the middle. One of the things that I didn't mention or put on the slide as a statistic that I do want to point out, now that I'm thinking about it, is that there is a pretty big delta between people that have both a personal computer and a smartphone, or just a phone with some kind of connection that isn't a Wi-Fi or internet connection. So that delta is where you have a miss on accessibility if you don't use mobile channels at all to communicate with folks. And people who are able to do online banking through their mobile device and communicate with their banks through their mobile device, if they're a person that doesn't have reliable internet, doesn't have a personal computer, then that's a huge win for the whole industry in terms of accessibility, because those people deserve a good customer experience. Those people deserve an easy way to communicate with their bank as well. So accessibility on top of preference is an important thing to think about when picking a channel to communicate with account holders. And I want to just get right into fraud. I mean, we know that this is a trending area for anybody who's talking about security in finance or any of the industries that we serve. We've seen a big uptick through COVID and also in the holiday season. So there really is no better time to talk about what's happening in the industry, what types of fraud should we really be protecting ourselves against. And the stakes are so high because we know that for every $1 we lose to fraud, there are $4 in associated costs. So what am I talking about when I say like associated costs, true cost of fraud? What we're referring to is customer service, legal, loss of reputation, account holders leaving, retention, churn, all of those things where it's just very possible that the loss and the cost is going to be way overinflated to the actual dollar signs that might have been stolen from somebody's account or something like that. And we're seeing headlines like this all over. And as a company that serves 5 major global regions, Soprano has seen like hot pockets of fraud lighting up all over in the last year, where a bunch of banks, say in Singapore, will get attacked by these really robust, sophisticated attacks. And then we're over in LATAM dealing with another big data breach over there. And just all over the world, this trend is being seen again and again and again by our teams. And it's, again, not just an issue of what did you actually lose, what may have been stolen. When it's customer data, those costs can be insurmountable. And when it's the trust of your account holders, that too is something that really can't be recovered. So it's really important to think about how to be proactive when you're looking at fraud and any kind of cybercrime that could be angled towards the banking industry or your account holders. And it's becoming much more difficult to do that because cyber criminals are changing their tactics much faster than they used to. And they're also launching schemes that are much more complicated. And they're able to do that because more often than ever, we're seeing cybercrime groups that are well-funded, potentially by the state, and they are operating in organized teams. Groups of engineers and other fraudsters and the like, working with bots, working with advanced technology, and taking on multiple points of the communication at once. So instead of a one-to-one attack where a fraudster might be smishing the login credentials out of like an elderly account holder. It's one-to-many where they're actually going for the orchestration systems. They're trying to access hack something internal, or they're trying to go for a more commercial-sized one-to-many attack that is very, very hard to find the root of. So again, this is part of the reason why at Soprano, we have angled ourselves against this problem by looking at the whole communication chain. And when I talk about the whole communication chain, basically it boils down to these 4 areas of the way a message actually gets to somebody. It really is so much more complicated than sending a message from point A to point B being a mobile device, because what it really is an originator goes through an orchestrator, the actual message is sent from a mobile network operator, and the account holder is the final end recipient. After this is the 4th step, basically. And another thing that creates complexity here is mobile network operators are sending messages in a layered, really like a layered structure. And they're using aggregators and deals with other mobile network operators and the actual cell towers belonging to a bunch of different companies. So when I receive a message from anyone, be it my bank or a friend, oftentimes that message will be sent and then it will ping, 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 ping through a bunch of different MNOs or aggregators, and people actually sending the message are handing it off and passing it off until it finally reaches my device owned by one particular mobile network operator. So that too, as we'll see later in the slides when we talk about some of these more dangerous and advanced newer types of fraud, understanding the complexity and understanding where the vulnerabilities are at each point in this communication chain is super critical to locking it down. So let's move on to what the Mobile Ecosystem Forum calls the 14 types of fraud that are out there right now. And if I didn't already intro the Mobile Ecosystem Forum, I'll just make a note that this is a group which is made up of panelists and advisors and board members from around the communications platform industry and mobile messaging industry. So typically we are looking to the MEF Forum for thought leadership, for an understanding of where the industry is going, for the best use cases in different industries, but we also are doing a lot of work with the MEF on fraud and understanding what kinds of fraud are coming for the industry, which industries are most vulnerable, and obviously banking is right at the top of the MEF's list all the time. So previously in the last slide, we're looking at these little icons: account holders, the originator, the bank, whoever requests that a message be sent, mobile network operators and orchestrators. Well, identity theft is something that we know has always been going after account holders and banks. And data theft is the same. It's the smishing, it's the phishing, it's spoofing, it's trying to get login credentials, it's calling and pretending to be somebody that they're not, creating urgency, using social engineering, or just compromising devices. So swapping the SIM card, forwarding the calls, taking place in SMS roaming intercept fraud, these things that can compromise devices and or steal data, all very much the bread and butter of the cybercrime interaction with banking for many, many years. But now we're seeing a lot more in these other 2 categories. And as you can see from these icons I posted up at the top here, these are actually going after originators a lot more, mobile network operators often, and banks themselves. Internal systems, these are those one-to-many attacks that I was talking about. So I want to point out 2 here that are trending. We've seen a lot more of this recently, and it's 2 that really do require this holistic look at the communication chain to protect from. And the first one is the very, very bottom right corner here, message trashing. So message trashing is a type of fraud where a originator, like a bank, might want to send a bunch of messages to account holders for whatever reason, probably a message that is meant to promote something at the bank, to grow accounts, to garner business, to enhance those interactions. And what will happen is one of the messaging providers in the communication chain will send a false delivery receipt to the originator, the bank, and just trash, not send a huge portion, a huge volume of those messages. And then because they didn't incur any costs in delivering those messages, a mobile network operator or somebody else who's acting badly in these layers of this business will give a kickback to the cyber criminals. And it's something that's very common. If you see a message going out and you're looking at a down funnel metric that you expect to have some kind of bump or sit at some certain expected level, and it's far below that, what you can do is dive into those read receipts, look and see if maybe you have been presented with some false information as to the delivery of those messages. Something that you can work with orchestrators and mobile network operators on, but it can be very difficult to figure out who the bad actor actually is. So you want to make sure that you're diligently tracking and reporting on the messages that go out and meeting the expected response rates. And then probably one of the most complicated and most dangerous fraud types that are out there that is, again, one of these one-to-many types of fraud is artificial inflation of traffic, also known as SMS pumping. So any website, app, or platform that has a web form on it is a potential victim of SMS pumping or artificial traffic inflation. And that is very, very common for banks, especially because many of the web forms that are put up by banks or apps that are put up by banks will have a one-time password response to whatever is input into the web form. So oftentimes a cybercrime organization will steal huge buckets of login information, or they will just use bots to spam the forms. And then they will also seek a large bucket of numbers owned by a single mobile network operator. And they will find some aggregator or some mobile network operator that's purchasing or providing traffic to the mobile network operator that owns that long list of numbers, and then they will use those numbers to spam the form. So what will happen is sometime on a weekend, probably the form will start getting many requests for one-time passwords or just that automatic text response, whatever the form is, and then that traffic will spike. The bill will be given to the originator, and which is acting badly, will give a kickback and do some revenue sharing with the cybercrime organization that orchestrated the bots or stole the numbers and did all of that. So with a little bit of work, an engineering team with the ability to make a deal with one of these bad actors in the communication chain could potentially inflate the bill of this kind of traffic by, an exponent of 10. And what will happen is a bank could be looking at a bill and saying we had a huge spike of traffic beyond the normal, and then nobody actually logged in. The login rates for these one-time passwords are super low. Nobody's logging in. And that is a situation where a bank would realize, hey, we've been victims of SMS pumping on one of our OTP web forms or one of our other automatic text response web forms. So in order to prevent against this, you need, first of all, an orchestrator that can help report and flag on those kinds of spikes in traffic. And you also want to lock your web forms down in such a way where certain amounts of one-time passwords can't go out without some kind of time breach or time limit. And you also want to look for consecutive numbers. So if all the numbers end in 0999, 0998, 0997 or something like that, and you can see a lot of consecutive numbers that might be owned by a single MNO, that's another indicator that your web forms have been spammed by bots. So a very complicated, very layered type of fraud that we're seeing a lot of, and it's basically a smash and grab and has a lot higher output for a organized crime organization compared to these one-to-one attacks where you're smishing login credentials out of somebody through social engineering. There's just so much more time intensive, and here you can get a huge kickback from somebody in a sort of one-time scheme. And it's also very hard, like I mentioned, to find the bad actor, to get to the root of the problem. And so making sure those prevention measures are put up proactively is really important to protecting oneself from this type of more advanced, more complicated, more organized fraud. So let's move on to some of the other measures that you should have in place protecting against all 14 kinds of fraud. Now, obviously, there's no silver bullets when it comes to protecting against cybercrime and organized crime and this type of fraud, but we need to go in the banking industry a lot farther than educating account holders against smishing, because that's one thin layer of what can potentially be a threat to your entire environment. And again, that whole communication chain where it's not just the end user and the end recipient of messages or the account holders, it's really all 4 points: the orchestrator, the originator, the mobile network operators, the providers, everyone. So one of the things that we recommend as a standard, of course, is multi-factor authentication, of course, is single sign-on and one-time passwords. But also, because we know that 99% of access hacking and data breaches are due to compromised login credentials, we also recommend IP access control for internal systems. So if somebody has successfully SIM swapped, call forwarded, intercepted the roaming on one of your employees' devices or an internal person, such that they could get a one-time password in addition to those stolen login credentials, that person, that bad actor or cyber criminal, would then still not be able to log in to your internal systems if you've blacklisted and whitelisted or approved and unapproved certain domains and certain IP access in your controls with your orchestration tool. So that's something that can help prevent against that small, thin margin of cyber criminals that might be able to break through those other barriers. And it does happen. That kind of access hacking is getting more sophisticated, like all the other schemes that I've mentioned, and making sure that extra layer is in place can be the difference between somebody coming and dumping a bunch of your account holders' data onto the dark web. Nobody wants that. And then the other thing I would suggest is using simple template messaging and probably different masking controls. So if you have a tool that has really robust hierarchy and also is able to templatize and standardize messages for lower level users, if somebody is able to break in, or maybe a disgruntled employee wants to send a message that, or there's a bad actor within the company that wants to smish your account holders on behalf of somebody else from the outside, using simple template messaging will help prevent that, because basically it requires certain levels of users to send messages that have certain content structure, messaging that's all set by higher level admins. So you won't run into an issue where something unauthorized goes out and you're actually smishing or attacking your account holders from an inside system. And that's one of those things that has happened. It can happen, internal systems being used by outside actors to smish account holders. And it's one of the worst types of fraud to happen in the banking industry because it corrodes trust so quickly and so deeply. It's just very devastating. And for the couple of banks this year that we've seen that happen to, the recovery is almost insurmountable. So being able to protect your internal systems with the maximum high level of security that you have available to you is very, very important to think about in this moment. And then, of course, we always want to suggest that people use a suite of products that cover multiple communication points. So you want to educate the end user. You want to use IP access controls on your internal systems. You want to work with an orchestration partner that uses reputable MNO partners. And you also want to use an orchestrator that is built for security. So this is a sort of summary of Soprano's approach to how we have built our Soprano Connect platform for the last 30 years. And you can see that in the upper portion of this, it's basically a representation of the entire product. Engagement and operational messaging, those two buckets are all the features we offer to provide a look and feel of a message. But on the bottom, through scale and compliance, this is where we talk about controlling a messaging experience. And that means we know that it's just as important to keep a secure infrastructure around messaging as it is to make the messages look good and go through certain channels. So the two parts of that being weighed evenly is sort of a theory or approach to product development that we've taken ever since our inception. And being built for security and being built for the enterprise is something that, that's been Soprano's absolute chief concern, again, since inception. So I talked a little bit about some of these security features, but I just highlighted them here because we've discussed them as part of prevention against these fraud topics that we're going over right now. And I just want to give, before we close out, a quick use case, because this is something that, again, because we serve enterprise and because we've been in the business globally for so long, we really like to see our partners expand their use cases beyond what is typical, while also using the top tier security that they can get from somebody who's set that bar so high for so long. And one of the customers, a banking customer that we have in the EU, obviously we need to keep that high security bar, keep in compliance with GDPR and all of that. But at the same time, what we wanted to do is help them improve their response rate to loan applications. And this is one of the things that Soprano specializes in as well, is doing two-sided use cases where operationally our APIs and our internal automations that exist within a banking environment are working with responsive messaging out towards end recipients and account holders. So an application process for this bank used to look like an application came in, sit on the desk for a little while. At some point, somebody would see it and they would move it through the process and then return it to the applicant. And while this time is passing, the applicant doesn't know where their application is. They're probably shopping around. And this is something that can be solved with a little bit of communication on the internal team side and the external side. So what we did was we set up a series of automations where internal teams would be alerted to the application coming into their portion of the process. They were able to address that application right away, because a mortgage loan application is one of the highest dollar value opportunities a bank can have with any prospect. And so being able to address it immediately, be alerted to the need for it to move through the process was really important and helpful. And then, of course, every time it moved through a piece of that process that was important for the applicant to know about, a message could automatically be sent to them saying, hey, expect an answer on your loan application in 3 days, or hey, we want to contact you about this piece and we need to get some more information, or we've received your loan application, it's in the process here or there. So we were able to help this bank get a 3 times higher response rate on those loan applications, because with that communication, stops people from shopping around, gives people confidence, ups the experience, and just overall improves the bank's ability to facilitate something like this when, again, those two-sided communications are working automatically. And so if you think that some kind of layered use case and that kind of expertise is helpful to you, or if any of these fraud types are making you wonder, oh, geez, am I vulnerable in some way? Is there a part of my communication chain I need to pay attention to? We have a white paper on it that goes really deeply into all 4 parts of the communication chain that I mentioned today, and the trending types of fraud. So you can download those at this QR code or on our website. And that is our abbreviated approach and briefing on security in the banking industry. And I'll just pass it back to Megan.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jane. So as you have heard today, mobile fraud is and will continue to be on the rise. As the customer experience is demanding a mobile-first journey, these are the vulnerabilities that should be top of mind to keep your communication chain safe. Soprano is offering a free security consultation, so please request one on the landing page if you're interested. Thank you again for joining. Have a great day.